Welcome back, Sebastian here. So today I'm going to be looking at Porsche and Andretti in Formula E, looking at basically the season review for these two teams. Of course, interestingly, Porsche works team, Porsche customer team. So first taking a look at Porsche and their driver head-to-head. Of course, their two drivers this year were Pascal Wehrlein and Antonio Felix da Costa, who had come over from Techeetah last year. So in points head-to-head, Wehrlein had a fairly big advantage, 149 points for Wehrlein, 93 points for da Costa. And of course for Wehrlein, he finished fourth in the championship, which is his best result in Formula E to date. Race head-to-head, where both drivers finished 8-4, so still again another advantage for Wehrlein. Average finishing position 5.9 for Wehrlein, 9.1 for da Costa. So that's about 3 positions difference, which is a fairly big difference. That being said, for da Costa, there were quite a few races where he had something happen to him out of his control, and he ended up finishing very low down. Think of the 3-minute time penalty in London. Qualifying head-to-head, so this is where Wehrlein had a massive advantage over da Costa, 14-2 in head-to-head qualifying. I think, during the races, they were honestly were not that different. I think in terms of ability, they were both okay, they were both good, but they were not consistently amazing throughout the year. They both had very good drives, but they weren't that consistent. But qualifying is the one area where Wehrlein had a massive advantage over da Costa. The gap, 0.171, so about 1/10.5 of a second, which is not a terribly large gap, but still a fair margin, especially when the head-to-head is 14-2. Average on my power rankings, just for fun, 7 for Wehrlein, 8.2 for da Costa. So kind of reflecting what I said earlier, I do think Wehrlein was the better driver over the course of the season, and he was definitely much more opportunistic with the points at the beginning of the season. But that being said, I felt da Costa was pretty good too, especially in the middle part of the year. But that being said, for da Costa, of course, he'll be looking to improve on that next year. Just looking at Porsche's form in the last couple years, 2020, their first year in Formula E, 79 points, 8th in the championship. Both I think they would be satisfied with, given that it was their first year in the series. Of course, Lauder, their driver over here for Andretti, did get a podium for Porsche in their very first race. 2021, a sizable improvement, 137 points, but still 8th in the championship. Of course, with this year, all the teams were extremely close together because of the qualifying format. So while the points look good, on paper it's really still in 8th place in the team's championship. 2022, with the revised dual system, 134 points, which was 7th in the championship. So dropped 3 points compared to the year before, but 1 place improvement in the constructors, or not in the constructors, the team's championship. Of course, for them at this point, I think it did seem like they were not really meeting the expectations from the fans and the kind of the Formula E community. They were really a works team and a very, very famous name at that with the Porsche brand. 2023 though, much better year, first year of the Gen 3 era, 242 points, but 4th in the team's championship. So you'll note that they're behind their customer team Andretti by 10 points. And I know for Porsche, there was several points during the middle of the year, the last 2/3 of the year, where they were the favorites for that team's championship, but just kind of fell away from them at the end, as the Jaguar-powered teams kind of really, I think, were the stronger team through the second half of the year. But for Porsche, pretty good year overall, really good improvement in points and in the championship, but I do feel like this is kind of a year where the championship kind of got away from them, especially when we talk about their customer team, Andretti. So now moving on to Andretti, of course, their two full-time drivers this year were Jake Dennis and Andre Lauder. Lauder, of course, missed the 2 races in Jakarta with World Endurance Championship commitments. So David Beckman basically came in those 2 races, which is why you'll notice that Dennis's points total is lower than his 220 roughly, that he scored over the course of the year, because I'm just looking at the head-to-head with these 2 drivers. But yes, so as races where there were teammates, 189 points for Dennis, 23 for Lauder. Absolutely massive difference. Reflects very poorly on Lauder, as well as reflecting very well on Dennis. And even amongst the 4 Porsche powered drivers, Dennis's total over the course of the full season, about 220, much better than everyone else. Average finishing, race head-to-head, 7 for Dennis, Lauderer 3. There was that 4-race spell at the beginning of the year after that initial, after the first 3 races, where Dennis kind of had a bit of a slump. He finished those races, which is why it counts in here. So 7-3 for Dennis. Still, Dennis was a much stronger driver. Average finishing position, 5.3 for Dennis, which is a bit low considering how many races he was on the podium. But for the same reason I mentioned, he has a couple outliers, which really drags that number down. Lauderer 12.5. So even with Dennis having those outliers, it's still over 7 positions difference, which is frankly unacceptable in pretty much any racing series. Quality head-to-head, 12-2 in favor of Dennis, with an average gap of about 3.5 tenths of a second, 0.346 seconds, in favor of Dennis. Average power rankings, 4.3 for Dennis, 17.4 for Lauderer. So very, very good for Dennis and quite poor for Lauderer. So, for Andretti, I think they'll be quite fortunate that they will have, that Jake Dennis has basically carried them to 3rd place in the team's championship. Having a second driver of, either of these drivers' caliber, they could have won the team's championship this year. I think Lauderer really held them back. He's basically looking at leaving Formula E, and I don't really think any other team would really want him. So for Andretti, I'll just leave that there. For Andretti, they were definitely going to be looking for a second driver to replace Lauderer, and there are quite a few names that are up in the air at this point over who that could be. Looking at recent history, 118 points in 2020, which was season 6, 5th in the championship. Of course, these 2 years were their last 2 years as BMW, I believe. 2021, 157 points, 6th in the championship. Still pretty good increase in points, but that being said, they did move a step back in the team's championship. 2022, dropped back a couple places further. At this point, BMW has basically left, and it's basically Andretti using what's left of the BMW powertrain. 150 points, bit of a down year, 7 points less, but still 6th in the championship, carried by a very strong year by Jake Dennis. 2023, really good improvement, 252, 3rd in the championship, and they do beat their works team, Porsche. Of course, I think this is Andretti's best ever team's championship finish in Formula E, so they'll be quite happy with that. Of course, more importantly, in some ways, they of course won the Drivers' Championship with Jake Dennis. So that's really my look at my season review of Porsche and Andretti. They are, of course, a pretty good year, really sizable jump up from last year. That being said, they did kind of lose out to the Jaguar powered cars in the end, and that's something that they're definitely going to be looking at fixing next year and coming out of the gate much stronger and continuing that momentum next year through season 10. So that's all for my video talking about Andretti and Porsche. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.